Hey, everybody out there. I know some of you have been listening to us for quite a while. Others maybe have just started to join in. We thought we would start kind of going back and doing some best of. So we thought this week we would share some of the best of stories, kind of condensed versions, if you will. And we hope that you like them. And if there's something of interest, you can always go back. We're going to tag these where you can go back and listen to the entire episode. And as always, thanks for listening.
From a child born into this world, we are taught what to believe. Closed-minded we become, fearful to be deceived. Still we desire to know what lies beyond that locked door. The art of the storyteller, conjuring tales of legend and lore. History hidden, lost knowledge, things forgotten and the unknown. These are the things that direct us and will set the tone. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
Are there still dinosaurs roaming the earth today? Basically, if you're looking for a dinosaur on the modern planet, it seems like the Congo is the place you want to go.
That's definitely a hot spot.
I would say probably half of all reported modern dinosaur sightings come from the Congo. I'm going to talk about Mekele Mbembe.
I'm glad you're pronouncing that.
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of strange names in here by the time we're done. Mekele Mbembe is a dinosaur supposedly found living in the Congo River Basin. Now, the natives of the region describe it as a living creature, but they revere it almost as a spiritual entity. So, it is first mentioned in the autobiography of big game hunter Carl Hagenbeck in 1909, where he wrote down that the natives described a creature that was half elephant and half dragon. Now, Hagenbeck, being a reasonable man, of course, speculated that this had to be a dinosaur.
Yes, why not?
He compared it to the Brontosaurus based on what they described and noted the sightings happened in places that were not always inhabited by crocodiles or hippopotami. I'm not sure what the plural is there.
Which seems to be a lot of people like, well, they saw a hippopotamus or deformed hippopotamus.
Yeah, they want to you want to try to attribute these sightings to something that we know exists.
Yeah.
And then later, there was another report came from a German captain, and forgive me, Ludwig von Stein zu Lausnitz.
Alrighty then.
Yeah. He had heard reports in 1913 of an enormous reptile that was alleged to have lived in the jungle. Now, he claims to have seen the creature. And in his report, this is his exact description of what he saw. And I'm going to do, quote here. Said to be brownish-gray in color with a smooth skin, its size approximately that of an elephant, or at least that of a hippopotamus. It is said to have a long and very flexible neck, and only one tooth, but a very long one. Some say it's a horn. A few spoke of a long muscular tail like that of an alligator. Canoes coming near it are said to be doomed. The animal is said to attack the vessels at once and to kill the crews, but without eating the bodies. Later on, you have an Alfred Aloysius Smith. Again, I'm going to butcher some names here. He mentioned the creature in his 1927 memoir, but he referred to a creature called the Amali. And again, I'm going to describe I'm going to quote him here. And behind the Cameroon, there's things living we know nothing about. I've seen the Amali's footprint, about the size of a good frying pan in circumference, and 3 claws instead of 5.
Mm-hmm.
So most terrestrial land animals have 5 digits. I mean, like the human hand, we have 5 digits, dogs, cats. Most animals, have that. So the fact that it has a different footprint, this is something, something that might be unknown. An expedition in 2016 visited the Likuala swamp region in the Congo.
Sounds promising. Great place for a
vacation
vacation
I have
house.
that wrong. They visited various Aka, or pygmy villages. And some of the villagers suggested that the last of this species had died out maybe a decade ago.
I actually, just days ago, returned from visiting family on the East Coast in the Virginia, North Carolina area. And while I was out there, I was doing research for the podcast. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to kind of see what's around me at this particular moment. Obviously, I'm from Missouri, but I was visiting there. North Carolina. Wow. North Carolina, of course, has its legends. There's the Bigfoot, there's the Lake Norman monster, lizard men. But recently, there's been a growing belief of modern pterosaurs living in North Carolina.
Pterosaurs are strangely common, actually, if you look at the stories.
And I mean, again, we've talked about in our day and age, it's easy to doctor up a photo and put stuff on YouTube and spread it. But I went down this rabbit hole pretty hard one night, and a lot of the photos and videos that they have around the North Carolina area they're just like, wow. I mean, you can see the coloration of the skin, almost like not scales, but the so detailed. It's just uncanny.
Well, and I think it goes back. We covered this in our Mandela effect, where I talked about where there's that picture of a thunderbird.
Yes,
and that picture is clearly meant to be a pterosaur.
Yes. So. Cryptozoologist Jonathan Whitcomb, he's an author of a book called Modern Pterosaurs, recently published an article about creatures, including the pterodactyl sightings in North Carolina. He had commented, "My associates and I believe that these are non-extinct pterosaurs, what many persons might call flying dinosaurs." Pterosaurs and pterodactyls are similar. A lot of times people will use the words in conjunction with another interchangeably, but there are some differences. Now, there's a Cynthia Lee who's been studying. She's becoming a veterinary technician. Now, she had reported to Whitcomb in his article that she actually saw in Raleigh, North Carolina, January 4th of 2020.
Wow,
that's pretty recent.
Not long ago.
A large flying creature that had no feathers, but it did have a long tail with a diamond-shaped bulb at the end of the tail, and its head had a crest, as she described.
Yeah, that is absolutely. Was it the pterodactyl or
dead description, dead on. And I mean, 2020. Hey, if anything's going to happen, it's going to probably be in 2020. Now, her recent sightings in Raleigh weren't the first occasion someone in Cynthia's family had seen an apparent pterosaur. She had told Whitcomb, about a sighting many years earlier, that her mother and uncle saw one as well while they were playing outside their grandmother's house many, many years back. They had told the grandma, but of course she didn't believe it. And she said up until this year, she thought they were extinct, and she didn't put much merit into the story either. But since she's seen one for herself, Cynthia has kind of become a believer, not only in her own family, but she says there's definitely something going on here in North Carolina.
Well, and we were talking about this earlier, and if you look online, there's a map of where there's been reported pterosaur sightings, and more than half of the states report pterosaur sightings. So it seems like a kind of a common thing.
I've got that map actually pulled up, and kind of, if you will, hot spots for the states. Here's a list of states that have had 9 or more sightings over just the past couple years. They include, obviously, North Carolina, Texas, California, Virginia, Georgia, and Utah. So we're not talking about on one particular coast, particular region, kind of feathered across, no pun intended, across the United States.
Yeah.
Just in North Carolina, again, like I said, I started going down this rabbit hole, and it's like, okay, so do we just have a couple sightings here in North Carolina? This lady had seen one in January of 2020, and then apparently her mom and her uncle years before had seen one. Oh no. Charlotte, North Carolina. A man and his cousin saw something bringing to their mind the word dragon.
Now, Charlotte's a big city.
That's a big city.
I mean, I've driven through Charlotte. That's a big city.
The man said, and I quote, "It looked like something I had saw in a Jurassic Park movie, and it flew over our car." How scary would that be? Asheville, North Carolina. A lady says that she saw a huge black winged creature fly very low over her car. It had no feathers, but had very sharp edges on its features, and again mentioned this long tail with a diamond-shaped club at the end of it.
Well, see, and Asheville's not too far from the Smoky Mountains there. I mean, kind of right there in the foothills.
Yep, very good coverage area. Jacksonville, North Carolina. Now, Sarah and I go to Jacksonville quite often. It's one of our favorite spots right there on the coast. But an eyewitness there saw something huge flying in the sky. It looked pale greenish white and had smooth skin. It didn't appear to have any feathers, and it had the tail with a diamond shape on its end. Again, these things seem to be attracted to moving objects, a lot of times to a car. They swoop down, maybe considering it prey.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe they consider that something they can snatch.
Possibly. Probably don't want to ride in a convertible. Note to self, North Carolina beaches.
If you're in North Carolina, stay out of a convertible.
North Carolina has since, it's being considered by many cryptozoologists as one of America's top spots for pterosaur sightings.
It was a dark time in American history when ideologies clashed. Brother fought brother. Father fought son. Of course, I'm talking about the American Civil War. And you have these highly emotional moments in time.
They mark not only the ground in blood, but with energy.
Yeah, in to this day, in some of these major battlefields, Wilson's Creek and Gettysburg, you still hear tales of ghosts and the like. So we're gonna talk about that a little bit tonight. Well, I jumped right in with this one, and I went to start with what you know. So we went to Wilson's Creek battlefield, known also as the Battle of Oak Hills and the Battle of Springfield. This was the first major battle of the Trans-Mississippi Theater of the Civil War. It was fought on August 10th, 1861. Both sides suffered heavy losses, with over 1,300 Union forces and over 1,200 Confederate troops losing their lives that day. The worst fighting was seen at a ridge which would later become known as Bloody Hill. People report seeing apparitions of soldiers on Bloody Hill and hearing the sounds of guns and cannons in the background when they're standing there. I think one of the stories was that a couple young men went to the top of Bloody Hill and they started to hear the sounds of battle around them, and they were just feet apart, but they couldn't talk to each other. Like, one would try to speak, but the other couldn't hear. Almost like they were caught out of time for a moment. Visitors also encounter abnormal cold spots in that area, and people there at night talk about hearing movement and talking in the nearby woods, as if people are undercover and trying not to be seen. There's a lot of reported activity in the Ray house, home of John Ray and his family. They took shelter there during the battle, and they survived unharmed. As the fighting moved on, their home became a field hospital. And if you're familiar with the EVP phenomenon, which we talked about before, I'm sure, but recordings made in the house pick up eerie moans and groans, from those soldiers probably that were there wounded.
You can only imagine.
One of the tales from the Ray house is of a volunteer. They were outside the home, and a volunteer was telling a story to a group when one of the students in the group pointed and said, "Who's that?" Well, he stopped and he turns around, and there's a woman in period garb walking between them and the house. He turns around to go ahead and finish what he's saying, and he's kind of curious. He doesn't know if there's supposed to be anybody else there. He looks back, and she hasn't had time to cross the whole distance or even go into the house, and she's no longer there.
Just vanished.
There's also a story told by a gentleman who his father told him that he had gone fishing with his uncle back in the 1950s, and they're on the creek there when they saw Union soldiers come through the trees. They marched across the creek and disappeared into the woods on the other side. Never heard a sound. Not a twig snap, not a splash in the water as they tromped through the creek. The man said he was there later fishing as an adult and saw the same thing. So it happened more than once.
Reoccurrence?
And seemingly unrelated, because there's no document of a teenage girl losing her life at this battle, but there's a ghost of a teenage girl seen near the postmaster's house. And she'll walk through the prairie grass down to the creek as if to fetch water. And there's no document of a young girl losing her life at that point. But
could possibly stand to reason. Maybe caught in gunfire, crosshairs. Okay. Well, I like what you did, kind of bringing it home to stuff you're familiar with.
Yep.
So I thought I would share a couple stories that literally took place out my front door or side door of the house that I currently live in. Now, of course, we're here in Lebanon, Missouri, And just a quick little history, there was what is called Old Town. Now, that was before the railroad came to town. And Lebanon had a couple streets over there where the original courthouse was, general store, tavern, the inn. When the railroad come to town, Lebanon people don't play well sometimes with out-of-towners. So long story short,
we still have that problem.
Yeah, we seem to. They were not able to reach an agreement, so the railroad decided not to veer towards Lebanon, but to almost intentionally veer away from Lebanon. So Old Town, as it was known, was picked up and moved to where the railroad has come through. And that's why Lebanon does not set on a true compass north, south, east, or west. It literally sets at an angle right along the railroad track as it came in. So the area we're talking about is considered Old Town, pre-railroad Lebanon. But one of the stories I was told many, many years ago, back when I was president of the local historical society, I was interviewing some people that had an old house in the vicinity known recently as the Keystone Mansion. Now, the story was there was a black servant that was working at the Keystone Mansion one afternoon during the time of the Civil War, and he had stepped off the back porch and was getting ready to ring the dinner bell when he noticed there was a large group of Union soldiers that was marching in on what would be called Old Wire Road. And Old Wire Road literally runs just to the right-hand side of my front porch. There's one other house on the entire block. That was called Old Wire Road because that is the telegraph wire road that would bring in the telegraph to Lebanon. He went out and he was ringing the bell, basically for dinner, but continued to strike it to try to alarm the people of Lebanon that the Union soldiers were invading Lebanon. The story goes on that he was shot by a Union officer trying to obviously keep their secret that they were coming in. And to this day, many people in that vicinity will say that they can hear this dinner bell being rung at or about sunset at certain times of the year. They're also kind of connected, but not exactly connected. Later on, there was a black couple that came to town that was interviewing for a book, and they had mentioned an old slave cemetery that was over there on the property. And that struck my fancy because I had never heard it at all about that with the Keystone Mansion. It is actually, as you're heading out to North 5 on the side across from the Guard Exchange off of Harwood Avenue. And according to what they said, they actually had family members that was buried there. The cemetery, unmarked, there's not a single marking whatsoever, would be somewhere around 20 to 30 graves. And said this would have been back early 1800s to like late 1800 time frame. And again, this is kind of an open field. I believe it's for sale right now. You would never know that was there. Now, ironically, cattywampus across is the big Lebanon cemetery. And of course, it's the biggest cemetery here in Lebanon. But a lot of people say that they have experienced crying, weird noises, feeling of being watched if they're walking along the streets in that vicinity. It's
really not very far from where I'm at.
Yeah, that's in between. That's literally the path between my house and Bill's house of where they're at. Now, the Keystone Mansion actually has a lot of history that is there. It was two prominent families that when they married, the Owens and the Keystone families, they literally connected the two family homes to make one. And when they did that, it was a massive house, 3 stories, not counting the basement. And there was over 20 individual rooms. Many were converted to bedrooms, 6 different fireplace hearths. And at different times, the basement served as a distillery as well as a mortuary. So there's a lot of history right there in that vicinity. Now, that house was tore down when they put in Easter Elementary School. And they put a road literally almost right through the path of where that house is at. If you look close enough, you'll still see kind of a block pillar that would have been one of the entrances to the Keystone Mansion. And at one time, there was some pretty lavish gardens and stuff that was there. But that area seems to definitely be a hot spot for paranormal activity, not just Civil War, but definitely Civil War time frame.
So I'm going to talk about the what's regarded as the bloodiest battle of the Civil War. on September 17th, 1862, in Antietam Creek near Sharpsburg, Maryland, called the Battle of Antietam or the Battle of Sharpsburg. There were 4 hours of intense fighting that took place on an old sunken road separating two farms. 23,000 plus men lost their lives that day, wounded, killed, or missing in action as the armies collided. One of my favorite stories from that area is the children from the McDonough School, and I may be saying that wrong, in nearby Owings Mills, Maryland. The class had taken a tour and gone through the historical part, and as the tour finished up, they were allowed a certain amount of time to go around and do as they will, so they were kind of roaming around. Some schoolboys ventured into an area about 100 yards from Bloody Lane. And when they got back with the rest of the group, they described hearing a chant like a Christmas song. Said it was the fa-la-la-la-la part of Deck the Halls. Now, that seems a little weird.
Yeah, that's what?
But then let me tell you about the 69th New York, also known as the Irish Brigade. They were Union soldiers they were all Irish immigrants fighting for the Union cause. And in the Battle of Antietam, they kept charging a Confederate position. They needed to break this Confederate line. They kept charging and kept charging. They kept charging until they were out of ammunition, no longer could fire at their enemy. Then they continued to fight with only their bayonets, charging this Confederate position.
Never give up, never surrender.
They were getting shot at and just massacred. I think they lost more than 60% of their unit that day. With each volley of gunfire, the brigade would charge across the battlefield and scream their battle cry. Now, this is Gaelic. I'm sure I'm going to not say this right. But the Gaelic phrase was Fau al Bala, which translates from Gaelic to roughly clear the way.
Very similar to fa la 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 la.
Yeah, and once the kids heard that story, they figured, you put one and one together.
Yeah.
So they were hearing the old Irish Brigade charging the Confederate ranks.
Now, again, for those people who would throw stones and scoff at some of this, that would be a very obscure fact.
And for them not to know ahead of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, to come up, here's what I heard, almost like invite the ridicule. Fa la la is a Christmas song. Why in the world would you kids hear that? Skinwalker Ranch is the Area 51 of paranormal activity. From beams of light and flying objects appearing in the night sky to tales of shape-shifting spirits and animal mutilations and demonic encounters with the mysterious Skinwalker Ranch is one of the world's most infamous and secretive sites of UFO and paranormal phenomena. Now, Skinwalker Ranch resides on a 512-acre plot of land. It's in Utah. It coexists with the neighboring Ute Indian Reservation.
I think we need to know the Utah County. That seems to be...
There's a lot of...
that comes up quite a bit.
Reference there. Dangerous spikes of radiation, moving unknown sources, anomalies above in the sky as well as below, possibly in caves. Skinwalker Ranch, also known as Sherman Ranch, located there in Ballard, Utah.
Or some people also call it UFO Ranch, which seems appropriate.
Well, this 512-acre ranch, like I said, it's actually I said it was Ballard. It's 512 acres southeast of Ballard. There's really not anything close to Skinwalker Ranch besides that. The name Skinwalker, obviously kind of a weird, unique name. It's taken from a Navajo legend, and it's concerning a vengeful shaman. There had been a feud between the Ute and the Navajo tribes, and the Utes at that time were kind of, if you will, aligned with the U.S. government, so to speak. And the Utes had actually sold some of their own people into slavery, it was said, basically. And
well, there was bad blood between those two nations.
Absolutely. So the Navajo stepped up and basically, the belief is possibly cursed the land that was there next to the Ute tribe for selling their own people into slavery. A lot of weird stuff.
Well, this property is located 400 miles north of the Navajo Nation. So, I mean, it's a ways away, it's not, not super far away. And like you said earlier, it just sort of butts right up next to the Ute Indian Reservation.
Yeah, a lot of the stories and stuff are definitely kept alive. I saw a lot of interviews and research with members of the Ute tribe there on the reservation. There's certain areas that the Utes to this day, they consider that sacred ground, maybe, or you just stay away from that area. You don't tread on those areas.
Yeah, that area has like a 50-year history of the unexplained. A local retired junior high school teacher from Roosevelt Junior High, a Joseph Hicks, he's investigated more than 400 UFO sightings in the, I'm going to say Uintah Basin, UINTAH. We're going to say Uintah.
We're going to say that. That works.
And if we're wrong, we're wrong. But he's investigated over 400 sightings since the early 50s, and reports that UFO sightings in that time have numbered over in the thousands.
I've heard this as well.
So some reports even include seeing living beings in the windows of the UFOs waving, or, indicating that they see, the viewers. And estimates say that over 10% of the Uintah Basin population has seen something. And when I say something, when you talk about Skinwalker Ranch, that something's a pretty...
Throw a dart.
Pretty broad category.
Yeah, everything.
You have Colm Kelleher and George Knapp, which George Knapp is a common name in these circles.
They wrote a book, I think.
Yeah, they saw or investigated close to 100 incidents personally that included vanishing and mutilated cattle, sightings of UFOs and orbs, large animals with piercing red eyes that were unaffected by bullets.
Whoa.
Invisible objects emitting destructive magnetic fields. I mean, like you said, you just throw a dart. They had repeated sightings of human-like creatures, and that sort of led to the Skinwalker moniker.
Right.
The old Skinwalker lore, which I don't think they're saying that they're seeing Skinwalkers. I think they're just borrowing the name.
Yeah,
so
I think you're right there. Along with crop circles, like you said, many UFO references. So you've got paranormal on the ground. You've got ghost-like creatures. You've got aliens and unidentified flying objects in the sky. Magnetic, weird EMFs, radiation.
Yeah, if you do a search, just a simple Google search, you just page after page after page, and it's all so, I don't know if bizarre is the right word, but yeah, like you said, this is just an area. This ranch is just plagued with the unexplained.
The Area 51 of paranormal activity,
and it's not just it's not just one people or one family. Now, it does seem that the Shermans? Yes. I think a lot of the stories come from their time when they owned the ranch.
When it was the Sherman Ranch.
But I have here even as far back as 1776, Franciscan missionary Sylvester Velez de Escalante wrote about strange fireballs in the sky when he passed through this region.
Well, then in 94 to 96, only 2 years, a Terry and Gwen Sherman owned it. And that's when, for whatever reason, it had adopted the Sherman Ranch name. I thought that was odd when you have the Myers who had lived there for, 60 years? It wasn't the Myers Ranch, but you got these, the Shermans come in, own it for 2 years, now it's the Sherman Ranch. But then in 1996, billionaire Robert Bigelow, quite a colorful gentleman, he comes in and buys it, and he owns it from 1996 to 2016.
Well, and he buys it like right after the Shermans come out with their story, like within 3 months, I think, of them going public.
And that is where, when Bigelow gets involved, it's the government seems to be re-involved again. He starts bringing in specialists. I mean, obviously the man is a billionaire. This is something near and dear to his heart. He took it very serious. He tried to hire the best scientists, the best doctors.
I know that's when that Colm Kelleher got involved, and he's a biochemist, so he's a scientist.
He tried to buy the best educated men and women that he could to research, and they took it very seriously. They seemed to be very methodical about it. And then in 2016, Bigelow actually sold Skinwalker Ranch for $4.5 million to a group that was simply identified as Adamantium Holdings. I had to chuckle on that.
Now, yeah, I mean, I'm immediately,
Wolverine, X-Men, Adamantium.
Yeah, that sounds like a shady company.
It was a shell company, no surprise there. But since the purchase, all the roads leading to the ranch have been blocked, locked, perimeter secured, guarded by multiple cameras, armed guards, barbed wire, signs all over the place, basically do not even approach, do not trespass, just don't even come close.
Yeah,
just
like they blocked it off completely.
Now, I've got a couple things I wanted to share. In August of 2019, the TV series is there. They actually caught footage with multiple cameras, And I won't get into the TV series a whole lot. If you're interested more, that's definitely something I suggest to watch. But the fact is that they had multiple people that saw this video camera footage that caught a silhouette disc. It was kind of a craft above a large tree. Now, what was interesting is directly beneath this tree was a cow on the ranch. Obviously, there's multiple cows. But this cow, at the same time when the disc appears on the video, the cow seems dazed and struggling to try to get up. It had been laying underneath the tree. They filmed the disc, and it like almost was directly above the cow. And again, it's hard to tell in video footage. Well, was it directly above or was it behind it? But it was lined up, I guess is maybe the best way to put it, with the cow, just for, I think it was 20 seconds, and then it took off. Within hours, that cow was found dead.
Now, I was going to talk about their UFO encounters because it seems like those are pretty well documented. The Shermans did claim to see UFOs on multiple occasions, and they saw what they figured there were three distinct types of UFOs that they typically saw. One was a small box-like craft that emitted a white light. Then there was a 40-foot-long object, and then another huge ship that they said was the size of several football fields. They'd seen one UFO that emitted wavy red lights or a beam, maybe as it flew. They saw other airborne lights. Some, and this is what I found very interesting. They said some of them seemed to emerge from orange circular doorways that would just appear in midair.
Portals
or dimensional travel of some kind. One UFO followed Gwen's car home as she was coming home one night. And then Terry and his son believe they actually were able to communicate with one of these flying objects.
Well, you mentioned something there with some of the interviews I saw with the Ute tribes and the Indians when they're talking about it. Now, their belief is you go there, something will attach itself to you and you will take it back home with you. You mentioned the lady in the UFO that followed her. That is actually tribal belief that it's not like you go and visit and witness it and you walk away and say, okay, I'm done. It's kind of that almost demonic aspect that you will take something back with you.
So Terry and his son, they saw a lighted object duck behind a ridge. Like it saw them coming and it was, crap. It goes off to hide. They snuck up on the object, but before it could hide again, they stood up and they waved their arms at it, trying to get its attention. Hey, we're here. What's going on? At which point the light flashed on and off 3 times before it disappeared.
There's a couple other things I wanted to bring up. Back on the homesteads. Now, one of the areas, homestead number 2, they said that was probably built somewhere in the early 1900s, 1910, 1920. That area is, in the words they say, is believed to be haunted. We've talked a little bit about all the other stuff. I want to touch base a little bit of the paranormal.
Yeah, let's put some ghosts in there.
They've done several paranormal investigations in these dilapidated kind of shack buildings. They've got the typical battery drains we've mentioned. Some of them experienced vertigo, which we also mentioned. A new one was they would have no sound. It was like their hearing would stop working for a period of time. They could hear nothing. Now, they did find, they call it a cave that is nearby. It's actually kind of on the mesa towards the top of the mountain is a sinkhole. This is kind of hard to imagine, but it's got some rocks and boulders that overhang, but it's collapsed. So it goes down inside the mountain. And around that cave area in particular, electronics like watches with batteries won't work. EMF readings won't work. Cameras won't work. They're getting, they say, 5 gigahertz signals recorded. But that can explain the weirdness in the electronics, but they're not sure what's causing all of this. But they've had shadow people. We've talked about shadow people around these houses and stuff, homesteads in the back of the ranch. They have heard disembodied voices. They have done recordings and caught what was described as demonic sounds, clicks, garglings. So again, we've got ghosts here. We've got paranormal, crop circles, beams out of the mountain, beams out of the skies, unidentified flying objects, shadow people. It's like somebody took a big Wheel of Fortune board and just put everything you could think of and
When you show up, you just spin that and you get what you get.
Now, a lot of people do believe one theory is that this is some type of a vortex, maybe where different times come together, interdimensional travel, if you will.
Well, I mean, we talked about the doorways that just open up in the air.
Yeah.
So.
Cows
disappearing,
could be sucked into a portal.
So all over the world, we have reported sightings of hairy hominids, beasts, throwbacks to a prehistoric age, maybe. In the Himalayan mountains, though, is a truly sort of unique hairy hominid. It has its own characteristics. Yeah, the locals call the Meto Kangmi. In America, we call it the Yeti, or abominable snowman. And I'm going to tell you where that name comes from. So the Yeti is said to be very muscular, covered in dark gray to reddish brown hair. They weigh between 200 to 400 pounds on average, and they're short compared to American Bigfoot. They average about 6 feet tall.
Oh, an average-sized human as far as height.
Yeah. They have a pointy, crowned, conical head, which seems to be pretty common in the artwork, with a wide mouth full of large teeth. They have very long arms. They're commonly regarded as being peaceful. Now, this is the most common description of the Yeti, the one that pops up the most in folklore and in the sightings of travelers in the mountains. They inhabit the Himalayas, and that's where they're seen. Now, those are the most common descriptions. However, there seem to be 3 varieties of Yeti that are commonly reported by the locals. We have first what we call the Little Yeti. It is said to be just 3 to maybe 4.5 feet in height. They inhabit warmer climates than the other Yetis, and are usually found in the forested valleys below the snow line in Nepal, Bhutan, Tibet, and Sikkim. Theories, of course, say that this is possibly a juvenile or even a female Yeti proper.
That's what I was wondering, if the size might not dictate the age or the sex.
Then we have what you call the Big Yeti. It kind of lives up to the common description that I gave earlier, 6 foot tall, reddish brown hair, muscular. It is known to attack yaks at times, and they are reported to live from 13 to 15,000 feet above sea level. So they're up in the mountains.
Gotcha.
And then you have what we call the Nialmo. This is a true giant, said to be 13 to 20 feet tall.
Wow.
He feeds on yaks, mountain sheep, and possibly even people. Now, he is said to wander the eternal snows of the altitudes above 13,000 feet. Now, Bernard Heuvelmans, sort of a renowned cryptozoologist and was very involved in the Yeti phenomenon, he suggested that Nialmo may be a myth inspired by the idea that Yetis get larger the higher up in the mountains you climb.
Now, I've got a couple other stories. If you don't mind, I'll kind of jump in. Now, you had mentioned, of course, that these sightings are all over the area. I've got one, actually. There's a creature called a chuchana. It is of Russian folklore in the Siberian Arctic area. It's described as 6 to 8 feet tall, so kind of your medium, or I think what you called the large.
Yeah, the Russians had like a full-scale expedition to find that, I believe.
But again, what was interesting here, we got Himalayans, we got the white snow, but all of them described the chuchana as dark hair, which is very much like Bigfoot Sasquatch type.
Well, a typical Yeti sighting is dark gray to reddish brown.
Their hair color
They're not
does
usually
change.
found. I know the pop culture sort of depicts the abominable snowman as being white, but that's not usually
necessarily true. Now, again, they say in the Russian version of the Chuchana that it is a Neanderthal type man wearing pelts, and while it has white patches for some reason that it has on its forearm. So their portrayal of this particular creature is it's not a monster, it's a Neanderthal man dressed in furs.
Now, you saying that, I know we're probably going to get a little bouncy here. I do remember there's a bit of Russian folklore about a woman who supposedly had a child, I believe, with one of these creatures because they're genetically similar.
Okay, makes sense. Well, this thing, it's said to occasionally consume human flesh. The hunter becomes the hunted, so to speak. So obviously, unlike many of their cousins, the vegetarians, vegetables on the side, please, but definitely a man flesh eater. And again, the belief isn't that it's a monster, but literally it's ancient man that somehow has survived in Siberia of all places. So I thought that was interesting, semi-related.
We talked about Siberia before. That's a unforgiving, harsh land.
Yeah, that's where it's almost a place, Siberia is where they send people to be forgotten, basically, and they just may not come back. So, yeah, definitely. Interesting.
You want to go, early. Alexander the Great demanded that he be presented with a Yeti when he conquered the Indus Valley in 326 BC.
Well, that seems a reasonable request.
Well, the locals told him that wasn't possible, that Yetis could not survive at low altitudes. So they refused his request. Little hit and misses here.
One of the things we'd talked about before we started recording, I think, is one of the more interesting stories, and I won't steal all of your thunder, but I do have a newspaper article dated March 19th, 1954, and it was simply called the Daily Mail. They printed an article which described an expedition of a couple teams actually obtaining hair specimens from what was alleged to be a Yeti scalp, and it was found at a monastery. The hairs were black to a dark brown in color, and if you had them in the sunlight, they said that they would actually reflect almost like a fox-like red tint. Very orangutan-ish, if you will. They were examined by Professor Frederick Wood Jones and an expert also in human and anatomy. During the study, the hairs were bleached for whatever reason. I guess this was part of the scientific steps at the time. It was then cut into sections.
Who doesn't want to see a bleach blonde Yeti?
A bleach blonde Yeti. These sections were then analyzed with a microscope, and then comparing those samples obtained with other known animals, such as bears and orangutans, both which we've mentioned. Now, Dr. Jones contended that the samples did not match a bear nor orangutan, but he believed they were more out of a goat or a cow.
Yeah, there's a lot of hair samples come up in my research, and I kind of just steered away from them because, to be honest, for the most part, they're not very convincing.
No.
There's one a separate incident where they had tested, some alleged Yeti hair, and if I remember the details correctly, they found that they were more similar to a bear, but not of an existing bear, of a bear that has supposedly been extinct. Some sort of glacial polar bear that they have in the fossil record that doesn't, it's supposed to have been extinct for
interesting enough.
Thousands of years. Yeah, that in itself would be fascinating if we had these glacial polar bears.
But I did find that as interesting. Now, are you going to get into the story with James Stewart?
I just have a little blurb about it, so if you've got a little more detail than I do, I can at least summarize it. I find it to be one of my favorite Yeti stories. I've read it repeatedly. But it's the story of actor Jimmy Stewart.
Jimmy Stewart.
Which, let's regard him as a classic American actor.
Absolutely.
Sort of a good guy. While visiting in India, and I believe it was in Pongbochi, I think is how you say it.
I believe that is correct.
He allegedly smuggled a Yeti hand out of India. So that seemed like it'd be
a movie actor smuggling a Yeti hand out. I come across the story and I thought, I got to find out more about this. So I kind of dug into it a little bit more. Penboshi, I believe, is correct in the pronunciation. And in general history, this hand is considered the Penboshi hand.
And I believe it's something of like a holy relic almost, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, it was rumored and believed, obviously, to be from a Yeti. One finger bone of the hand was tested at one point, and DNA showed it to be human. So there's that first little morsel. Adding more confusion and mystery to the story, however, there was a Tom Slick. He was an oil businessman, an adventurer.
And let me just say, when it comes to searching for the unknown and the unexplained, I love the name Tom
Slick. It sounds like an old magazine title kind of thing.
Or maybe one of those old cartoons like, the Johnny Quest or something like that.
Well, Tom Slick, he had led several expeditions himself in search of the Yeti. And he had said to have discovered this Penboshi hand at a monastery previously. Now, when the monks were asked, could it be removed to be scientifically studied, they absolutely said, no way, you are not touching this, because it had been passed down for at least decades in the monastery. And yes, it was kind of considered a holy kind of relic. Tom Slick and one of his associates might have stolen a few pieces of that original hand, as the story goes.
We're not going to let anything get in the way of the truth here.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the stuff, and you go down these rabbit holes, but some of the stuff said that on one of the expeditions where he had discovered this at a monastery, they had lost a man in the trip, froze to death or whatever. The rumors are that they removed his couple fingers to replace it with this Yeti hand. Now you have to envision this Yeti hand isn't like in a glass display box for everybody to see. It's wrapped up in linens and cotton. So yeah, you could technically pull off a couple finger bones, I guess, and maybe slide some others in there and wrap it back up.
We appreciate your sacrifice, Bob.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. You'll go down in history, not maybe in the way you wanted to. But so there was this, that these finger bones had been stolen for scientific study, and replaced it with that of a known human adventurer. So then you have to say, okay, well, at what point was it discovered that the finger was dictated by DNA to be human, and was it really that old? But the history of this Penboshi hand, the monks finally, they kept going back, and I'm sure they just harassed the heck out of these poor monks, you know.
Yeah.
It's so rude. I mean, honestly, it is.
Well, it's American, though.
Yeah, it is. It's probably one of the most American things we do, but it's sad. But they stated that the origins of the Yeti hand were legitimate, it was real, and that many, many decades ago, one of their own had walked into a cave to meditate. And while they're in the cave, he found a Yeti that he was sharing the cave with. He did not harm it, and the Yeti did not harm him. So it was kind of a spiritual, accepting nature, one accepting another.
Again, the Yeti's commonly regarded as being peaceful, and I know, the religions in the area, they revere the Yeti. That's a spiritual entity to them.
Yes, that's why you don't want any harm to come to it. Well, finally, he completes his meditation. They share the cave together. He leaves the Yeti there. And I guess later on, it does mention that, there wasn't a lot of communication. There wasn't a lot of, up close. It was the Yeti was in the cave with me, but it was kind of off to the side. Now, several years later, the same monk returned to the same cave, and he found the Yeti deceased. So maybe the Yeti was sick when he was there years ago. Maybe that's where the Yeti lived, and it finally just died of old age. But he felt that story needed to be shared and proven. So that is where the hand come from. He actually, it said, removed a scalp, which I'd mentioned in one of the earlier stories, as well as this hand, and he took it back basically to bestow upon the monks of his monastery to protect this new religious artifact. After several people had studied it, again, which fingers did they study? At what time frame did it all take place? Scientifics said that it was the closest match they could find would have been a Neanderthal type man.
And that seems to come up quite a bit, the Neanderthal connection. So in Central Europe, there's a story. But we're going to go back. We're going to go back to the past a little bit. We're going to start with the origins. We're going to start talking about the Niklausspiel, which I'm going to say a lot of words that might be German and they're going to sound terrible.
To a German person, yes.
But this was known as the Nicholas play. It's a seasonal play that spread throughout the Alpine regions. And when I say Alpine, in this case, I mean places in the Alps. Now, the Nicholas play features a competition for human souls. And it plays on the questions of morality of good and bad, where St. Nicholas would reward children for scholarly efforts, rather than just good behavior in general. It kind of grew up in the Alpine regions where the Roman Catholic Church started to have influence a long time ago. Now, there were already established pagan traditions in the Alpine regions that they kind of started to intertwine and come together with these newfound religions, Roman Catholicism. But people, in these pagan traditions, they would masquerade as a devilish figure known as the Percht.
The Percht?
Percht. So, Percht sounds good. Now, these were two-legged humanoid goat creatures with a giraffe-like neck, wearing animal furs. They wore costumes and marched in processions known as Perchtenlaufs. Again, I'm going to say a lot of these words and they're going to come out wrong. Now, the Perchtenlaufs were looked upon with suspicion by the church, and they were banned in some reasons. Now, of course, due to the sparse population of the area and the rugged environments, it was not effective or easy to ban such of the traditions.
Right.
Now, the Perchtenlaufs would eventually introduce St. Nicholas into the story, where St. Nicholas was sort of the opposite of the Perk. He was the good guy where they were the bad guy.
Got to have the yin with the yang, I guess.
And these Perks, as you can guess, would eventually become what we call the Krampus.
The Krampus.
So, of course, the Krampus, we're going to describe him a little bit. I think most people are probably familiar with what the Krampus looks like in this day and age, but you have a horned anthropomorphic figure, typically described as half goat and half demon. And if you have a moment, I suggest you just go ahead and pause, jump on Google, go to Google image search, and just look up Krampus. And try to look some of the costumes that these people wear for these Krampus festivals.
Parades and festivals.
These costumes are insanely good.
Nightmares.
But yeah, terrifying. He's hairy, usually brown or black hair. He has cloven hooves, with some descriptions having one human foot and one hoof. He has a long pointed tongue that lolls out of his mouth and great big fangs. He usually carries chains or has chains hanging about his person. These are thought to symbolize the binding of the devil as part of that Roman Catholic faith.
Christianity phase coming in, yes.
And he'll thrash the chains for dramatic effect. And sometimes the chains will have little bells on them. So he's got the jingle bells.
The jingle bell rock. Now, he also carries a birch switch and a basket. Is that correct?
Well, he either carries a birch switch or bundles of birch switches, which the bundles are called rootin.
Okay.
And, I think it goes without saying, but he uses those to
whip the children.
Whip unfortunate children.
And throw them in the basket over his shoulder.
Some versions replace the rootin, the birch bundles, with actual whip. So Krampus is a bad dude. He oftentimes appears with a sack or a basket strapped to his back, which he uses to cart off evil children. Now, what does he do with the evil children? Well, it's not really quite sure. Some stories say he drowns them.
Ooh.
Some stories say he eats them.
Ooh.
Some stories say he takes them to hell.
You got to get the coal from somewhere.
Yeah. Now, older versions just make mention of the naughty children being put in the bag and taken away, quote unquote. So wherever they end up being, Now,
I'll stop you there. I read some of these stories. The children, a little graphic here, but they would literally be beaten. Some of the depictions in the stories, they were thrown in like the burlap bag and stomped upon. I mean, we're talking some gruesome, nasty, child-beating stuff. And yeah, did he beat them until they were dead? Did he just tenderize them a little bit? No, it's not real clear.
The Krampus is a bad dude, and you want to be a good kid. They're not messing around. Little coal in your stocking is nothing compared to being beaten.
I was going to say, we
Krampus.
flash forward, and it's like here in America, and it's like, now, little Jimmy, you behave or you're going to get coal in your stocking this year. Compared to, can you imagine these parents sitting down overseas like in Austria, and it's like, now, Bill, you know what's going to happen. It's the same thing that happened to your sister last year. If you don't behave,
But of course, like I said earlier, these are pre-Christian origins for this creature.
Now, this goes back. Krampus, in a lot of lore, is one of the companions of St. Nicholas in some of the stories.
Yeah, I was going to. That's definitely an angle. I looked at the different companions of Santa here.
And this region goes over to Austria, Croatia, Hungary, northern Italy, as well as like Bavaria and Slovenia.
Yeah, you have the tradition of the companions of St. Nicholas, which we could talk about a little bit now if we want to. So he's just one of the companions of St. Nicholas, which they're all kind of shady dudes if you get into it. You have Knecht Ruprecht, which would be farmhand Rupert. He's a man with a long beard. He wears furs or he's covered in straw, kind of a working class fella. Carries a long staff and a bag of ashes. Would wear little bells on his clothing, so he's kind of festive.
Yeah.
He asks children if they know their prayers. If they do, they'll receive a treat. If they don't, he beats them with his bag of ashes.
Another trend here.
You have Belschnickel, which if you are a fan of The Office, Dwight Schrute and the whole Belschnickel thing. But he would wear furs that cover his entire body. He would sometimes wear a mask with a long tongue, kind of a Krampus-y looking little face.
Santa's got quite the little chain gang following him. St. Nicholas.
He's rather scary, and he'll visit kids at Christmas delivering socks and shoes full of candy.
That's what every child wants. But at least you do get some candy in there.
Now, if you were bad, he would leave you coal. So there's some coal there.
reference.
You have Zwarte Piet, or Black Peter. He's typically depicted as a Moor from Spain, which I didn't think that's where the Moors came from, but I might be wrong.
Not up to par on my Robin Hood Prince of Thieves.
Now, he traditionally punishes ill-behaved children by beating them with a birch rod, so you got more of that.
More of that. Such hostility at Christmas.
Now, typically, in traditional festivals and whatnot, when people dress up as Zwarte Piet, they do so by dressing in blackface. So as you can imagine, Black Peter has kind of become a controversial figure.
I can only imagine.
In this day and age. The last one I have here would be, I'm assuming he's French in origin, La Pere Fiotard, or the Whipping Father.
Whipping.
He brings a whip, and he accompanies Santa on all of Santa's visits. And if you're a naughty child, he ruthlessly beats you with the whip.
Wow, there's a trend here, folks.
He's got a scary pointy face, and he dresses in dark, scraggly robes with a big, long beard. But, of course, there's, in the Alpine regions, they have what they call Krampusnacht, which is the feast. The Feast of St. Nicholas is celebrated in parts of Europe on December 6th.
Right.
Krampusnacht is the night of December 5th, the night before. Wicked hairy devils appear in the streets.
Wicked hairy devils.
And they sometimes accompanied by St. Nicholas, but they will visit homes and businesses, and running into safe havens, quote unquote, doesn't necessarily save you from the Krampus. Now he can come in uninvited and beat you with his birch rod. Now St. Nicholas in these events will typically appear in Eastern Rite vestments of a bishop. Well, in the Catholic Church, he's a saint.
Yeah, not the typical Santa Claus, the saint.
Not our Santa Claus.
Yes.
He carries a golden ceremonial staff, and he only concerns himself with the good children, which is, again, unlike our American Santa, who, he does stuff for all the children, supposedly.
Yep.
Now, Krampus, of course, supplies the coal and the Rootin' Bundles to the bad children, and how he applies the Rootin' Bundle, I think we've gone over that more than once.
Yeah.
He's going to beat you with it. I want to take a time to thank the people that helped bring this all together. Alex Tudor, you can almost call him our producer at this point. Sarah Tudor, who also helps with some of the technical stuff. I want to take a moment to extend thanks to Eric for letting us use his space to record in, kind of our makeshift studio.
I, in turn, would like to thank Bill for, one, putting up with me and using this camaraderie to do something we both very much love and enjoy doing, and thank Bill's family for allowing him to spend all the time to work and clean up our recordings and present them in what you hear in the final terms, the final edition, if you will.
And I'd like to thank all of you for continuing to listen. I know we've got some loyal followers out there. We do this as a labor of love, but we're happy that there are people that enjoy it hopefully as much as we do.
Thank you very much.